So in this video, I tell you how to install the camera, the flight controller, the VTX, and the receiver, and then what to do with these pesky antennas so they don't get chopped up in the props. Let's get right into it. It's gonna be a long one. I'm going to be putting the Maytech F722 Mini, and this operates with these little silicone standoffs. These are kind of easy. You just kind of squish them in place. You just kind of stuff these through the hole like this, and you repeat that for the 4 of them. So what they also include are these little brass pins. These just fit right inside that hole and press fit in place, and that will give a nice solid mount. This has an arrow facing the front of the quad, so the front of the quad here is like that. So Maytech comes with a nice little wiring harness that fits right in here, and it would appear that they have all the other ends already hooked up with nice little clips. So we're gonna have to make a wiring harness. All right, so this blue wire on the flight controller is telemetry. That's gonna go into pin 1 of our new Molex. Sorry, this is not easy for me to both do and make sure that the focus is correct. So we locked telemetry into pin 1 for this. The next wire we're gonna want is our current wire, is the yellow. We're gonna hook that into pin 2. Very good. Current wire. Then the next we want signal 4. Signal 4 is the first wire coming out of the Maytech. And that's going to go ahead and clip in right there. And you're listening for an audible click. And again, I'm sorry for this focus. Next, we want this wire coming out of the Maytech is signal 3. Signal 3 is next to here. This next wire coming out of the Maytech is signal 2. Signal 2 goes here in pin 5. I'm listening for the audible click and I'm not getting it. There it is. Okay, next wire should be signal 1. And then this is signal 1. Bring it to there. So next wire is our battery wire. That's VBAT and ground. Okay. So I'm just gonna take that and flip it over there. Tuck that in tight there. And usually I would wanna wrap these wires, twist them around like the motor wires. I am not gonna do that just because we're running out of room on the top of this board, so I might want to be able to kind of squish the wires in like that, and yeah, see, that'll work. If I twist these wires, they're gonna be in the way, so they're just gonna lay flat like that. Right on top of the flight controller. So there we have it. The flight controller is installed. And now that we have our flight controller in, we want to install the XT30 connectors, paying special attention to positive and negative and male and female ends. As you can see from the battery, this has the female end, So we will be installing the male end. Now, the reason I have the other end out is when working with these, usually you need high enough heat that this plastic will begin to melt. So what I suggest we do is to install the female end into it so that when this does heat up and become malleable, it does not squeeze in on itself, thus making all your battery connections a real big pain. So we're going to solder this end on, and then once the solder joint has cooled off and the plastic has cooled off, then we can just remove the female end. So let's get right to it. Take these wires and we're going to cover them with a little bit of shrink tubing. So I'm going to cut this shrink tubing to about 1/2 inch long. This is the 3 times shrink tube. Red for red, black on black. So what this allows us to do is once we make these connections, we can have a good covered solder joint. All right, so go ahead and strip your wires. Go ahead, strip back your wires, and then I cut these down so that they're roughly 1/4 inch long, and that kind of gives you enough wire to stuff into the XT30 connector. And usually I pre-tin these, but these are going to be some tight connections, so I'm not going to pre-tin. Again, make sure that you put your shrink tube on first, and then we're going to go ahead and place this inside of the XT30 connector. This one has been used, so I'm going to heat the connection first just to get the solder to move freely, and this wire can sit in there easily. Once your wire is in place, I heat the wire, then I heat the backside of the XT30, and then I feed the solder into the joint. It will go through the wire and touch on the XT30, the blade connector. Just like that, it starts flowing. Make sure you put enough in there to hold it in place and make a good solder connection. Connector over, and we are going to repeat the same process for the positive wire. Place the wire inside of the XT30 connector, and then I heat the wire. Flip it over and heat the connector until it takes the solder. Next, we take our heat shrink and run it right up to the XT30, like so, and then apply heat. Now that that's done, let's live dangerously and check your connection. Sweet. So if you're enjoying this video, consider clicking that subscribe button. And any of the tools and parts in this video that I speak of are listed in the links below. Next, we will be installing the capacitor. In this particular build, if you're going to use the same PDB, the supplied capacitor is a 330 microfarad capacitor up to 25 volts. And if you don't already know this, usually the legs are cut one long and one short, but the better way to tell positive and negative is the stripe on the side is the negative side. Now on this PDB, positive and negative, they give a solder pad. So I'm going to stick this right here. Again, utilizing the negative side on the negative lead, and I'm going to place this here. Flip this over, and I'm going to solder through here on the back side. Very careful making this solder joint because you are surrounded by nylon and TPU, and all this stuff will melt. It's got about the same, nylon I think is about the same melting temperature as solder, if not maybe a little bit lower. These types of nips come in really handy. So you can just kind of get in there and nip this thing off as close as you can. The one thing that I did off camera is I changed the way I installed this PDB to the stack here. The PDB comes with the smallest, it comes with 8 spacers. So what I had done is I used, starting from the bottom, I put down here, I put a web, then I put one of the smallest of the spacers, then I put the PDB, then I put another of the smaller spacers, and then I put the flight controller with its rubber mounting and its brass pins. What this allowed me to do is get the stack as low as I possibly could, cushion both the PDB and the flight controller, and allow just a little bit of room on the top. So what this allows me to do is to place a web on top of the flight controller, where I will be placing the TBS Unify Pro 32 Nano. So I'm going to stuff this right there on top of that web. And I think I can manage to get this cage to fit with those sitting right where they're at. Yeah, that will work. So I will be placing the RXSR right next to the TBS Unify Pro 32 Nano. And this will definitely fill up the top of this quad, but I think it will work. So the first order of business is to get the wiring done on this Unify Pro. And this is tiny wiring. And because this is not a soldering tutorial, I'm going to go ahead and do these soldering joints, and this will make it a lot easier for me to show you on camera, showing you which wire belongs to what pad rather than, oh, look at this tiny little pad. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that off camera and get right back with you. When soldering wires onto the TBS Pro 32 Nano, and having it just as I have it here with the antenna connector facing up and the wires facing to the left, this top pad, which I have the green wire into, this is your smart audio. The next pad down, this is your video. The next pad down, which I have omitted, is a ground. The next pad down after that is your 5-volt out. If you're going to power the camera off of this, those 2 wires are what you want to use. I am not, so I have omitted them. The next pad down is your ground, and the next pad down is your positive in. So these are the only wires I'm going to be using to both power this, get my video out of it, and be able to control it in the OSD. That's what the smart audio is for. So with that, this is all set. So we're going to take the supplied web and we're going to go ahead and attach the TBS Nano to it. I'm going to go through 2 of these wires just to clench this in the middle. Just like that. And I think I'm actually going to double this up. Go back one more time to really sock it down. Be very careful with these wires, moving them around, trying not to pull on the soldered joints because you will pull them off fairly easily. Okay, so I've taken the VTX and I've wrapped the supplied rubber band around the web twice, securing the VTX. I'm not sure if I want to wrap these wires underneath or over, but regardless, they're going to be the same length. So I'm going to go ahead and pull them a little bit more than 1/4 inch longer than I actually need, and then I'm going to nip them off there. So right about there. And then I'm going to go ahead and strip just the tiniest bit off of these. This is about 1/8 of an inch. And then I'm going to bring back these helping hands, flip these wires over, and I want to use great care in really moving these wires around as much as I am, because every time I move them, I'm really putting undue stress on the end of the wire and that solder joint. Being as small as they are fairly weak, and just moving them around like that is going to make them pretty brittle. So I'm going to go ahead and pre-tin all these wires. So to hold this in place, I'm going to utilize the helping hands, which again, these are not my favorite. First, I'm going to pre-tin these pads that I need. So I'm going to need the TX3 pad. I'm going to need a ground pad. And I'm going to need the VBAT pad. The VTX pad. I'm going to need a ground pad. And I'm going to need the VBAT pad. I am going to go ahead and start pinning these wires down. So this goes to the TX3 pad. VTX wire, whoops. VTX wire right there. Then my ground wire. And then my VBAT wire. That is the VTX installed, and this should sit right on top like that without these wires getting in the way. We're going to go ahead and remove the S-bus in wire. We don't need it, so it's coming out. So the reason we removed the S-bus in wire is I'm not running a secondary receiver. The way this thing works is you can have a secondary receiver and they act as a redundancy. So should this one lose signal and the other one still has it, it will send that signal to this one, which in turn sends it to the flight controller. We're not going to run that on this little quad, so we are definitely not going to need that wire. So that's why I ripped it out. So what we are left with is the ground, our 5-volt wire, our S port wire, smart port wire, and finally our S bus out. That's the signal from this out. So we're gonna flip the quad over and we're gonna go ahead and pre-tin the pads we need here. And if you notice, this is why I always leave enough room to work on things. Because this cap is in the way, and now it's not. So now we can safely work on this and run from there. What I'm also gonna do is put this RXSR with the wires going this way, so when we do work on this, I can flip this up, and then this will be something on the order of this, and then these wires will come this way. So if that's the case, I'm going to go ahead and clip these wires right now. Deal. Just ripping a pinch off of these. 1/16 of an inch maybe. Pinch these guys here, splay them out, and while we're here, let's get these pre-tinned. Now that we have our wires pre-tinned, I want to pre-tin the pads that we're going to need. So we are going to need a ground pad. We are going to need the 4v5 pad. We're going to need R2 and T2. So I'm going to go ahead and do T2. Grabbers. We're going to put our ground wire right here. Next, our 5-volt wire. We're going to take our S-bus wire and place this right to the R2 pad. Finally, we're going to take our smart port wire. This is the yellow wire. Place it right on the T2. Wrap these wires back the way I had them. To wrap underneath. So now that that is all in there, I want to put the rear of the cage on. One thing, a special note here is to make sure that your capacitor is not touching these solder joints at the back of the quad. So what may happen there is the aluminum case of the capacitor may cause a short. So just be aware that is a thing. One of 2 nuts on top. So lastly, I want to screw this back plate on just to help hold this cage. Lastly, our camera. The camera that we're going to be using is the Caddx Turbo EOS 2. This Maytag F722 controls 2 cameras. We're going to utilize the camera 1 pad, and then over here we have our 5V and our ground. I'm going to go ahead and pre-tin those now. Now, because of the way this works, the camera is going to be mounted into this piece here. So this piece is always going to be near, it's always going to be near the quad. So because I want enough working room, I'm going to cut this wire fairly long, right about here. Peel back a little bit of the wire. Split these ends out like so. And pre-tin. Yellow is camera wire, video signal. Black is ground. And red is power. I'm gonna go ahead and install these wires onto the front of the quad. I'm gonna take my yellow C1 wire and I'm gonna place that to the C1 pad. And I'm gonna take our ground wire next. And finally our 5V wire. Go ahead and clip the antenna on. A nice audible click there. And then what I'm going to do too is I'm going to place a zip tie later on, right around here. So the original version 1 mount was a 2-piece solution where you would capture the camera inside of this horseshoe and then screw this plate into it, capturing it in place like that. The issue that I was seeing with this camera is because the focus is so close to the body, this solution wasn't going to work. So I reached out to the company to find out what their idea to fix the problem was, and they came out with version 2. Okay, so first we're going to remove the lens from the camera. I'm going to take this TPU mount and I'm going to slide it over the barrel of the lens. Next, I am going to stretch it over the adjustment ring and push it all the way to the front of the lens, just like that. Now install it back into the body of the camera. And I will use this time to adjust my focus. How you do that is screw in or out the lens until you get the desired focus, and then twist this ring back towards the body to snug it in place. And then what I usually do is I will back off just a pinch, turn the ring into the body, and then utilize the actual lens itself to secure the focus ring, and that gives you a nice tight focus. So now that that focus is adjusted and tightened down, we're going to go ahead and put this into the cage. The way this is done is just kind of press it in place. Make sure the camera is facing the proper direction. In this case, wires down. from the top of the cage and just kind of roll it in place. Okay, line up one side right there and screw it in. Over and repeat the same process for the other side, and I'm going to use this guy just to kind of push this into position right there. Then go ahead and adjust the position of your camera and your camera tilt. And then cinch down into place. And finally, rotate your wires into position. Line up the top mounting holes and these slots. And press fit into position. Next, screw in the front mount. And the two side mounts. And then we replace the top two nuts. So I'm going to utilize, these are 4-inch zip ties. Nothing special about them. I'm going to put that right underneath the cage, making sure I'm not capturing any wire. And I'm going to zip this in place right here. I'm going to go fairly snug. See, I don't like that that's going to get sucked into the props, but I really don't have too much other option. If it does, I will let you guys know as usual. So there's that. Okay. So I think the best course of action with these antennas is to put them off the back of the quad. And I think if I route this cable like this, yes, I'm gonna go down through the arm. Actually, this is gonna kind of push them facing one another. So hopefully they don't really impede one another. Put that there. Take one of them. Move these out of the way. And just put this like this. Over the zip tie, over the antenna, right like that, and then I'll clip this to length, and then I will take another and place it over the top, and taking care not to cut into the antenna. Place this like this. I think this will yield okay results. The only issue that I have is the antenna will want to cross each other just by the very act of the frame design. So what I'm going to try to do, if I have a lighter around here somewhere, did I put it away? I'll fix that later. I'm gonna repeat the process here. So I want this to go down through the frame and then zip here. Putting the zip tie like that, and then cinch it to the frame fairly tight. And then I can take the antenna here. Going over the zip tie and the antenna once again. I'm also drawing this antenna over the power wires, and the reason I'm doing that is because these power wires are going to be drawn down to the battery, so I don't want them intermingling with the antenna wires. I'm going to push this on there all the way to the base, and then clip the extra. Okay, now I need to take this and clip this one as well, and then place this on here. There's that. This one fell off. I'm going to put this back on here. So now what I'm going to try to do is pull these outwards and then shrink the shrink wrap. I don't know that that's going to help any. But I definitely don't want these two touching. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and pull this over here. And I don't think this is going to make a world of difference at all. I'll try not to burn my finger. Actually, let me do the tip first. On there. Now I'm going to pull this over here and hope that this retains this bend once I do this. And it looks like it just might. Over here. If all works out, these guys will just sit back there and not get taken up by the props. There were a few changes I did make off camera. If you'll notice, if I can show you, the wire between the flight controller and the PDB, this Molex here, I have ran in between the flight controller and the PDB instead of on top. That allowed room on the top of the flight controller for the wiring for the VTX and the receiver. So what I had done there is I laid a piece of servo tape across the top of the flight controller and put the wiring and the receiver and the VTX on top of that, and then I used the web on top of that, and that sandwiches everything together nice and tight. And then I was able to put my antenna and cinch that cinch that into place with a zip tie. So that is how to complete the build of the Carbon 2.5 from Redshifters. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, give me a thumbs up. And just punch that subscribe button, because you only get to do it once, and it's fun. And I'll catch you later. Peace.